Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. Here we are on End Times Friday.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. We're excited to continue our discussion about that. We had a pretty good, I don't know if you remember last week, we had a pretty good discussion on the remnant.
Yeah.
And just the importance of community for people to line up with other like-minded people that have a heart to hear God's voice and walk with him and abide. That life is going to get tricky. I've dealt with particularly this last couple of weeks. There's been a mandate for the vaccine that involves executives with their businesses.
Anyone who has a company over 100 employees, correct?
Right. So I'm dealing with a lot of those executive CEOs who are, praying about how do they handle that? What do they go? They already know that they have a lot of employees that aren't willing to take the vaccine.
Right.
And therefore they believe that if the mandate is absolute, that it's going to dramatically shrink their workforce.
Right. Which is already a difficult thing to have enough employees right now anyway. In almost every industry, there's shortages. Yeah.
And that they're, interesting enough, the government approach to that is we're going to increase and extend unemployment benefits. So if you don't want to work because of the vaccine, you want to go home, and we'll pay you to go home. So they're a little bit concerned about that, but they again are, and again what I've been urging them is these are the kind of tricky things. Whether we're headed toward the end per se or not, we are in a difficult time. It's an unusual time where there's government decisions and policies that are impacting our everyday life. So people have to understand, and again, it would be in a way, what Daniel experienced, and all the remnant that left Israel, that went to Babylonia. Their life was completely different. Now it wasn't the end, obviously, but they had a completely different life, and tricky and difficult. The government says, and you must, and Daniel, and interesting enough, and this is kind of a subtle thing about it, but it constantly talked in Daniel chapters 1 through 6 of all the interesting things they had to face. And every time Daniel said, we went and prayed together. We went and sought God together. It wasn't him alone. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and other people around him.
Right.
Where
again, that community the importance of community
was, let's go to God together. So the importance of all that is that, it's tricky, and it's going to get trickier, I believe. So you need a community around you to process. Linda and I have one. Linda and I serve other people with that, and they have all kinds of interesting questions. And as we approach a community of the remnant, it's not a matter of, well, you should. Here's what I'm going to tell you what to do. It's that, no, I'm going to go to God with you together. And we know that God will give us an answer. And by the way, and Neil actually mentioned this yesterday about the covenant, is that the covenant isn't conditioned on a, what I would call a lovely, peaceful government environment, community, economic environment. He says, I'll give it to you because I can.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, I can still deliver this to you. It'll be different.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have a different path like Daniel did. He wouldn't have chosen to go to Babylonia. He would have chosen to stay in Israel. But given that that's his new life, God said, I can still deliver to you the covenant, which he did.
Right.
So we've talked about that and the importance of, following, paying attention, watching the signs, etc. As we move to this next thing, we talked a little bit about this last time, but there are these seals that are opened up, and these are all prior to the tribulation. So these are things that have happened or may be happening that are indicate another set of indicators, and they're very specific.
Right.
Because when it says, and this would be similar to what you described as birth pangs.
Right.
When they open up the seals, it's like, well, the birth pangs are getting more intense and now purposeful.
Right, because you're seeing prophecy fulfilled of things that must take place before the tribulation comes, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, he describes it as who's worthy to open them up. Well, the only one that's worthy is Christ, because why? He says, and again, remember what Christ said: I only do what the Father tells me. That here's the time. Yes, son. It's the time. These things are going to happen, and let me talk briefly about that. By the way, so that it should change our prayer life a little bit, because when we're looking at these things happen in the world, what I have a lot of people come to me and say, I'm praying that this would end, this would stop, God would take care of it, the COVID would be ended, we don't need vaccines, that economy would be great, I'm praying for that. Well, as we're headed to the end, these prophecies are kind of difficult. They're going to happen, and because they're going to happen, our prayer life really should be to embrace them. And to say, okay, given that that's going to happen, how do we understand it? How do we live with it? How do we are still living in the covenant through it? But we don't
still experiencing abundance and peace and joy in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. And we don't ask God to stop something that is prophesied. If we thought about how simple that is that, well, God says, why would you want me to stop it? It's headed toward these things, so that, for example, is there going to be a tribulation? Yes. Is there going to be an antichrist? Yes. Is there going to be a mark of the beast? Yes. And so we don't say to God, well, no, we don't ever want that to happen.
Right.
He said, no, it's ordained. It's going to happen.
What's interesting though is I think what you're talking about is we do need to shift our perspective, but I think what you're describing is actually what a lot of people are praying. I was even with a friend this weekend who was talking about, she recently moved to North Carolina, a precious friend, and went to this Bible study group for the first time this last week and came home and was suddenly very stressed. She's like, everything I'm hearing is I clearly need my eyes open and need to be praying against all of these things that are going on. And so you could tell that she was anxious and she was stressed by what she heard. And I was like, okay, let's back up and talk about why you would be anxious about some of these things,
Yeah.
And the reality is, if we have a right perspective of heaven and a right perspective of God, I've heard you say it 1,000 times. If I've heard you say it once, if this is coming, hallelujah, bring it on,
that's right.
And so there is a different perspective that we need to embrace. Not saying, if he tells us to speak or to stand on something, we certainly do. But at the same time, we don't approach the end times with dread or fear. we approach it with, what do you have to say, God? And how do we navigate this? And isn't this exciting? We're one step closer to the beauty of the completion of what you've promised,
Right.
even if there's tribulation, or even when there's tribulation in the midst of it.
That's right. And we have a New Testament example. Jesus prophesied. He spoke this several times, that the temple is going to be destroyed,
Hmm.
which means the city is going to be destroyed, and there's going to be persecution. Um, it happened, by the way, in 70 A.D. So about 40, not almost 40 years after he died. And he had built the church, and then he knew that the church was going to be, and the Jewish nation was going to be destroyed, and the church was going to
Hmm.
be persecuted, which was called, and by the way, what it's called is a diaspora, the spreading out of the
Mm,
gospel, because people left and said, well, we're not
right.
supposed to stay here. We got to go elsewhere. But they took who
Right.
they had in them, Christ in them, and started churches all over the Europe and into Asia.
And
Uh,
actually a huge blessing that then the gospel was taken so much further than it would have been.
yeah, so that it wasn't, and the believers, he didn't pray, and we can read this in church history. They didn't pray, well, God, stop that.
Mm,
But Jesus said, I prophesied that.
mhm,
I spoke that. You need to join me in understanding it so that I can give you instruction as
mhm.
to what I want you to do as you go through it. And there's a bigger, what I call a bigger story, a bigger purpose going on, so that as we move into that, we understand it. Another example, we've actually talked about Israel back in the middle 1800s. Um, England particularly was struck by Israel, and the church in England, the believers in England, were praying. And again, they didn't themselves say, well, God, get rid of the Muslims in the Middle East and just put the Christians back. They said, what would you have us understand?
Mhm.
And God said, I'd like you to begin. This happened in 1850 something. I'd like you to begin to pray, intercede for the return of the true Jews back to Israel,
Mm,
and then I'll give you instruction. And so they didn't themselves say, well, I think you should. They
mhm.
just said, okay, help us understand it, and they began to pray. And then God gave them instruction. And the
Right.
first instruction he gave them, this is really cool. They had an embassy in Jerusalem,
Mhm.
and they said, you take a group of people and go and live in Israel, and you go into that embassy and form a church.
Mm,
Uh,
interesting.
and they got permission from the British government. Okay, we'll allow you to do that. We'll pave the way for you to go live there, and you can meet in our embassy, which was protected.
Mm,
And they started praying, and they worshipped, and they studied the word, they abided, um, and they said, okay, here we are as a church. What would you have us do? He said, one of the issues for the Jews is healthcare.
mhm.
Those that live here and the ones that would like to return, because it's under Muslim control, they can't get healthcare. So
Interesting.
you go get doctors.
Mhm.
You build and raise money to have hospitals and clinics for the Jews, and they did. And that gave the Jewish people the strength. Well, okay, if I can get health care, I'm coming back. Interesting enough, it was all done by Christians, which
Wow.
they
That's
and God
beautiful.
said, by the way, you don't need to overdo that. So
Mhm.
don't say, oh yeah, we're Christians. Look at what we're doing. Just go do it.
So
because
they're not marketing it. They're not letting everyone know. They're
no,
just doing God's will.
Yeah, because the Jews, interesting enough, if they would have thought, well, that's being done by Christians, at the moment they were kind of anti-Christian.
Right.
And they didn't understand it, so God just said, just build it, serve it. Don't worry about even witnessing. That'll come later. And then they set up schools. And they did a variety of wonderful things to get an infrastructure in place that attracted the Jews. And so they started coming back in the late 1890s and into early 1900s. And then, of course, they had World War I. And out of World War I, after they defeated, and by the way, the Muslims during World War I joined Germany and Italy against the rest of the world. And so they were part of the defeat, which, by the way, they decided during World War II, we're not joining anybody. We're not going to be defeated. So as a result of that, in 1918, the British it's called the British Mandate, were given by the world's leaders at that point. Will you go ahead and oversee Israel? And you can lead it. And so what happened is that the church that was in the embassy, basically, because they had the permission of the British one, who were now running Israel and Jerusalem, you can be public. And they came out and set up a church, and it was became publicly known. As well as, and they still kept encouraging the Jews to come back and praying for that. And they started to do it. And they did it more and more and more, all under the kind of the governance of the British. After World War II, because of what Britain had done, and because the church was already there, they were the ones that initiated in the United Nations, let's let Jews have their nation back. Why? Well, they were a great number of them had already come back.
Right.
And that's when out of the World War II, Britain established the nation of Israel again, and let them, okay, now we're going to hand governance over to you. And they were still coexisting a little bit with the Muslims, and they had a limited amount of land that they could run. And again, I talked about this before, but then the Muslim nations came against them in 1967, and in 6 days they won the war and got the entire biblical land back. So it was a sequence of from 1850s all through the intercession and guidance of these British people that set up a church, being led by God step by step by step. We talked about Theo, but they were a community, and they were instructed. Here's what I want. Here's what I want. Here's what I'm doing. And of course, the people that started it in the 1850s never saw the end of it because they died.
Right.
Their kids and their other people joined it and became part of it, but they were just instructed, here's what I want you to do. So as things get tricky, it's really critical to not pray against the stuff that's going on, because it's all ordained, like Jesus said in 70 AD, like what was happening with the British in 1850s. They didn't say, well, God, just take care of it and reestablish Israel. No, I'm asking you to fulfill my will step by step by step, right, in community, which they did. So that's the difference that we need to have a perspective is, are things going to get tricky right now? Yes. Is it the end? It's possible that it's even going to get more so, particularly as we enter into the tribulation. The key is have a community and don't pray against what you would like to have happen, but rather, Father, show us what is happening, what is going to happen,
Right.
and these things we're going to talk about here
Yeah.
with the seals going to happen.
Right. And in fact, one of the things you highlighted in their prayers, you said they didn't see the fruit of those all the way through. But what you're talking about is laying prayer tracks ahead of God's work.
Right.
And he told them way back when they asked him, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to pray? He told them what to pray ahead of.
That's right.
And literally praying, laying prayer tracks ahead of the work that he was accomplishing. And what a privilege to be called into that rather than calling in your own will.
Amen. Well, let's look at these seals. We've described how they were opened. Let's go ahead and read them. Revelation 6, 1-8. Again, go ahead and read those. Revelation 6, 1-8.
Sure. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that the people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beast of the earth.
Yep. So these first four seals are interesting. That remember these are pre-tribulation,
Mm-hmm.
and they are descriptive with what John could observe. So
Mm-hmm.
he's looking at it and saying, "Okay, this is what I see. I'm going to try to explain it." Because remember, he's seeing specific things that we know is 2,000, at minimum 2,000 years later,
Right.
that he would have a hard time saying, "Well, I'm telling you exactly what it is." It's like, well, this is kind of what I see.
Mm-hmm.
So it's symbolic. We have to look at
Right.
symbolism. So the first seal is, and by the way, the Lamb is Christ, so he's the one that could open these seals. And by the way, this is part of where we got our label of our broadcast.
Mm.
The one of the four living creatures said with a voice, "Come and see."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
um, and then John said, "I looked, and behold." Um, and that's what we're trying to invite you to is,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not a matter of we're telling you you should. We're saying, come and see.
Right.
Finding truth in a world of chaos. The chaos is going to get more and more and more, and God is inviting all of us. Well, come and see, and let
Mm-hmm.
me walk you through that. And so that's why we got the title of our broadcast. And he says, I saw a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. So the symbolism there is, the bow is representing he's going to war.
Okay.
Um, so here's somebody that's going to war. Um, a crown indicates he's been given authority or headship as a leader to fulfill it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so um, he's going to war. He's been given authority to do this. And he says he went out conquering and to conquer.
Okay.
Um, and by the way, on a white horse. The white horse, now, by the way, this isn't Christ, because he talks about Christ coming later on a white horse.
Okay.
But it is implying that the intention was out of what the world would consider to be good.
Mm.
So that it wasn't a red horse or a black horse where it's bringing death all by itself. It's not part of, in other words, it's not part of the satanic approach to things. It would be, this is probably considered to be a pretty good thing to do.
Okay, that widely received as we're, if we're walking and living in the midst of it, we would see it as a good thing.
As a good thing.
Okay.
So one of the explanations from that could be, and as we look at the timing of these other ones, and then what happened is that back in the 90s, there was a problem in the Middle East.
Okay.
And what happened is Saddam Hussein was the dictator of Iraq. And what he did, remember, it's in the Arabian Peninsula, and a small country on the southeast side of that peninsula, next to Iraq, was Kuwait.
Right.
Kuwait was and is a super wealthy nation. They were democratic. They fundamentally cooperated with the West. And by the way, they're Sunnis. We've talked about the Sunnis and the Shiites.
Right. The difference between the two, right?
Kuwait is Sunnis, and Iraq was primarily Shiite.
Okay.
Fairly extremist. And the way Kuwait operated, by the way, which is why it never, and Saudi Arabia operates this, they're very similar to this. Their riches comes from oil.
Right. Are they divided among the population, or
Yes.
the owners of the land as well?
And so it's extreme, in a sense, extreme wealth because of the oil that they've got and sell worldwide. And Kuwait, by the way, has refineries.
Okay.
Big time refineries. And what they did is they received all this income and they distributed it amongst the citizens of Kuwait. And of course, you had to be, of a heritage there. You couldn't just
So
say,
this
hey,
wasn't to every citizen. There were certain parameters.
Yeah,
Okay.
every citizen got it.
Every citizen.
Every citizen got it. But because of that, you couldn't just move there.
Oh.
And say, hey, that's nice. I would like to get that wealth too. I'm going to move there. Well, they wouldn't let you move there. You had to be basically born there. But it was a very prosperous state. Well, Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait. And Kuwait doesn't have basically any army. So they're attacking Kuwait and they're going to beat them. They're going to defeat them and take it over. Okay, at that moment, is when George H. Bush said, we're not going to allow that to happen.
Right.
And literally within a few weeks, they said, we're going to defend Kuwait and we're coming after Iraq. And that to me could easily have been the unveiling of the seal, and we'll talk about the sequencing of it, is that the world considered that to be on the white horse, and he set out to conquer and to take it over, and that brought America into the Middle East, basically action of war.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the implication of that. And so he went to war and sent our resources over there. And I don't know if you remember this, but I do. Because of our technology, we could pinpoint what we wanted to do is primarily aircraft missiles.
Okay.
And it's the first war that anybody on television could watch live. And there would be, we're going to hit this target, and the missile would hit that target. And we could see it on television.
Right.
It was because the missiles themselves had cameras. So we saw them go and hit, and so they pushed Iraq, Saddam Hussein, first of all, off of Kuwait. So okay, they stopped. They couldn't defeat Kuwait. We stopped it. Now we went after them, and we attacked, and we pushed the Iraqi forces back to Baghdad.
Okay.
And at the moment, they could have destroyed Saddam Hussein and Iraq and taken it over. They could have done that, but they stopped, and they said, okay, now that we've prevented them from attacking Kuwait, and now they know they can't push any aggression to anybody, including Israel, we stopped. And the war was only like 2 weeks.
Right.
But it was, and they set out, and the Western world, looked at this as a white, it'd be a leader on a white horse going to war. And I believe that was the unveiling of the CO1.
Interesting. Can I ask, has there been another time in history at all that people have thought, okay, that this could be that first seal? Any other things that?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
When interesting enough, the United States again in 1940s, Hitler was taken over. He had taken over Czechoslovakia, Austria. Austria was called the Anschluss, and that was why don't you just surrender? We won't go to war. And the Austrians said, okay, fine. You're way more powerful than us. We'll just let you take it over. And they took it over as part of Germany, and flew the Third Reich sign. And that's by the way, you can watch a little bit of that in The Sound of Music movie.
Yep. One of my favorite movies.
Is that when they flew the signs all over and said, now you're German, and everybody has to become German. And of course, von Trapp, he was requested to go to Bremerhaven and become an officer in the German Navy. And he and Maria and their kids left their home. By the way, it didn't quite happen like the movie, where they said they climbed over the mountain and left, with that out of the nunnery. They kind of saw what was happening, and they knew the borders were going to be closed, so they actually got on a train, and they exited about a week before the borders were closed.
Okay.
And he went from there, interesting enough, from Spain up to England, and then took a boat to the United States.
Yeah, where they settled in Vermont.
Not
far from here. Yeah.
So that was the real story of that. But in the movie, there's this great, they've got the German Third Reich sign all over, and the little girl, says, why are they always so angry? And she says, is it because of the spider on the flag? Because they took it over. So when that happened, the United States basically said, it's a war in Europe, we're not getting involved. We're not going to do it. And so they didn't. Well, we got hit
in Pearl Harbor.
By Pearl Harbor, by the Japanese, who took advantage of, everybody's distracted over in Europe with Hitler. We want the United States. And so they came on Pearl Harbor and flew over and bombed, Pearl Harbor, much to the surprise of, the Americans. And December 7th, 1941. And when they did, then the presidency and the Congress decided, we can't stay out of anything now, so we're going after Germany. and we're going after the Japanese. And interesting enough, we had two wars going on at once. Well, the Christians at the time, and again, it got a little bit fuzzy for them, but they said it looks like Hitler's the Antichrist. And these seals are being opened up because the United States is the one on the white horse.
Right. So they saw the potential for the prophecy being fulfilled there.
Yeah. And they're coming to to go after it and save it. And of course, remember this seal, and we got to go to the second one and the third one and the fourth one. It wasn't that the white horse won, and it was over, which happened in World War II.
Right.
We actually defeated the Germans. We actually defeated, Japan, and it was over. And then, by the way, it ushered in a great season of worldwide prosperity. Interesting enough, and this is really clever by Eisenhower. The war destroyed the entire eastern, France, Spain, most of England, all of Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland. With the bombing that went on, it destroyed everything.
So much, yes.
So what Eisenhower did is say, well, we got to get them back on their feet. So what they did is he sent all these Americans, primarily military people as well as business guys, and they went literally city by city by city all over, France, England, Italy, Germany, particularly Austria, and they became the mayors of those towns.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And he said, okay, and they said, we got to build roads again. We got to build buildings. We got to get people working. And we're going to run it. We know how to run it. We're going to run it until you, the local people, can step into those roles, and then we'll release it. And he did it city by city by city. So it wasn't even universal, like we're going to do it for 5 months and hand it over to you. It was, we're going to operate it until you local people have the wherewithal to know how to do it and keep it going. And they handed over city by city by city, and we invested equivalent of billions of dollars.
Wow.
To rebuild everything, which is funny because today a lot of people in Germany, particularly people in France, they resent Americans and think we're imperialists, which we weren't and haven't been. We actually, the reason that they can even have economy today is what we did back in the 50s.
Right.
And he did that. And by the way, he did one other thing. And that is that he filmed the concentration camps. And he said 50 years from now, if I don't film this, they'll say it never happened. And I've got to record it because it happened. We saw it happen. We can observe it happen. And even today, there's revisionist history that's trying to say it never happened, to the Jewish
there's
Jewish
proof
people.
Everywhere, right?
But he filmed it all, and so he had evidence of it. So he was really brilliant in what he did. But so he would have been considered, the man on the white horse. But it was all restored. Well, this seal is it's seal number 1, and basically it triggers everything.
Right.
It doesn't win.
Because there wasn't restoration at the end of it.
There's no restoration. It actually triggers a whole sequence of things that get very, very negative. But the first one, it's almost like it starts with this event, which I believe was the attack on Iraq, and it already happened. Okay, the next one, the Red Horse. Okay, well now that's the negative one. Another horse, fiery red, went out. It was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and the people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword.
Right.
Okay. I believe that that was 9/11, which, by the way, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of.
Right.
That was 9/11. So because of the first seal, which triggered everybody thought, well, this is good, and of course they won that little war. They didn't go any further than that. They didn't conquer full. They just went out to conquer, but they didn't fully conquer it. Well, then the second seal is a sword comes to kill people. Well, what happened on 9/11? We get hit, the Twin Towers in New York, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The flight, by the way, this is really interesting, was headed to Chicago to hit the Sears Tower. That's where they were headed originally.
Wow.
But because they already had identified what was happening and the jets were being scrambled, the terrorists decided to just crash it into the ground in Pennsylvania.
Yes, I remember hearing.
Well, Kathy, guess what? On 9/11, I'm on the 45th floor of the Sears Tower.
Were you really?
I was on 45th floor of the Sears Tower. I had a meeting in Chicago. I was in the Sears Tower, and after they hit the Twin Towers in New York, they put an announcement out, which everybody could hear in the building. Everybody get ready to evacuate because there's something happening. So like,
Oh, that's fascinating. I had no idea.
we're in our meeting and it's like, what are they talking about? Somebody comes in and says, turn on the television, and we turn on the TV, and literally we saw the first one burning. And we're just watching it, and yeah, we've been instructed to evacuate. And of course, I was with a bunch of business guys. It's like, we're not gonna just leave. We're gonna try to understand what's going on first before these guys overreact and that kind of stuff. So we were just sitting there watching the television, and we saw the second plane hit the building. And it was like, oh, because it was at first it was.
Well, this is not an overreaction.
It was described as a small plane had hit it was like an accident. And then
I think no one knew at first.
They didn't know what was going on. And then when the second plane hit, yeah, I'm in the Sears Tower. Yeah, we need to leave. We need to go. So the whole building evacuated. And interesting enough, that flight was intended to go to the Sears Tower. And hit that. So we were preserved completely from it. But what that did is it triggered the activity of terrorism around the world. And basically, when you think of the sword, the Muslim approach primarily, and when we've seen it over and over and over again, is using a sword to slit the people's throats.
Right.
And what they call behead them. And so I believe that 9/11, with being led by Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden, was, well, we're going after the Western world, and he brought death through the sword, and all it says is that he was given authority to do that. It didn't even talk about the result. It just said that he was given the authority to do that. And so, and that people should kill one another, which is the extremist Shiite approach, is literally, we're going to take the Quran at its face value, and everybody that's an infidel, we're going to kill. And 9/11 kind of ushered in, interesting enough, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, etc. And by the way, guess what? We just handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban, and they're bent on, which is the fear now, is that, well, first of all, now that they have a country and they've taken it over, it's going to be a breeding ground of terrorism around the world. And by the
Right.
way, they
And they're already putting former criminals in key positions in the country.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And that a lot of the Afghanistans have come. We've came over in the escape process, and they've already lost them. They don't know what happened to them. Where are they? Well, I believe that they're probably
Mm-hmm.
terrorists, that have come over. So the second seal, I believe, was 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
and it opened up that the aspect of taking away peace
Mm-hmm.
from the earth, and there's almost a universal, kind of a tenseness
Mm-hmm.
that do we live in perfect peace anymore? No, we don't, because of the terrorism fear. France, Germany, Italy, even in China, Russia, U.S., that there's been terrorist attempts,
Right.
to thwart things. So I think that they would take peace from the earth. I think the seal number two easily could be considered 9/11. Okay, the next one, the third
And
seal,
that would have been more like the precipice of it, the starting of it,
starting of it.
because it did branch out in so many other ways, even on our own soil, to ones that are not remotely tied to Al Qaeda, but
Yeah,
there's,
because
we have our own
this
terrorists.
one,
Yeah.
it says it's granted to him to take peace from the earth and to
Mm-hmm.
kill one another, and he was given a sword.
Right.
Um, See it in all of these. It says here's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't present a conclusion.
Right.
So
It basically opens the door.
we
And what you're really seeing here is spiritual warfare
right.
unleashed, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's setting up. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
it's a sequence to set up coming of the tribulation.
Okay.
So the third one is a black horse. He had a pair of scales in his hand, and a voice said, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Uh, okay, so the black horse is basically saying scarcity. There's going to be
Mm-hmm.
scarcity, and there's famines happening all over,
Mm-hmm.
and things are becoming more expensive.
Right.
And
And now we've seen this for years in other places, but we are beginning to see it on a worldwide scale that is different,
That's right.
correct?
That's right.
Okay.
And there's scarcity as a result of it, so that after 9/11, we've gone into a period now of famines around the world. Supply now we have supply chain issues, and it says, "Don't harm the oil and the wine." And the word for oil literally could be interpreted, you know, uh, real oil. So uh, it's not harming the Middle East source of oil. They haven't
Hmm.
come after that. So that isn't in scarcity either. And wine, again, would be the aspect of the fruits of the grapes and the wine production around the world. That hasn't been harmed either. It's the main stuff. It's his wheat and barley, which is, you
Mm-hmm.
need that for basic food.
Right.
So basic food is going to become more and more scarce, and we are
Mm-hmm.
seeing it right now with food prices are going to go way up. And by the way, it's going to be difficult
Mm-hmm.
to get certain things to do, because I believe this third one has already been unleashed as well through the famine and through what we're doing with food. And then the fourth one is a pale horse. The name of
Mm-hmm.
him who sat in it was Death and Hades. A power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and the beast of the earth. Okay, here we talk about people dying on a fairly large basis,
Mm.
um, and it's pestilence. It's by still the sword, so it's continuing the activity of the sword and killing
Right.
people, wars,
Mm-hmm.
and people coming against each other, and basically disease. And so I think that he's describing here probably what just happened to us in the last year and a half, which is COVID.
Mm-hmm.
and that death and what's going to happen next. And perhaps we'll see, and we haven't seen this yet, but we might see massive groups of people dying
Right.
because of pestilence and disease that can't be controlled and can't be managed properly. So that here we are with the seals 1, 2, 3, 4. With you look at the sequence of them, remember they're in sequence. They are in sequence.
Right.
So the fourth one happened after the
one
third
triggers another.
one. One
Yes.
triggers another. And think of them not as little individual events and then it's over. They build upon each other.
Right.
So
Well, and even now, as we sit in, in this time of COVID and all of the sickness and death from that, the division and the animosity across the world, that you're seeing everywhere has rolled in from all of these things
That's
as
right.
well and amplified.
That's right. So that I believe it started in the 1990s. With the first one, the second one was 9/11 and the unleashing of terrorism. The third one is famines and scarcity, which we're experiencing, and then the fourth one is going to be pestilence and continued terrorism to kill people. And so there's this aspect of, and we haven't seen the outcome of that yet, because instead of fourth,
Right.
a big number. Remember, John is just looking at it and saying, well, a big number is seeing people die. Again, that's in process, and all of these things have been building on each other, so that I think these 4 seals have all been opened. And it's because of the interesting things that have happened, and now we see it and participate in it. It's very possible that these 4 things have opened. So we can, we can look at it. And by the way, as you properly said, we'll have other people in other generations saying their stuff as the 4 seals.
Right.
Yeah, kind of. But remember, there's no conclusion to these.
Okay.
There's no, okay, it's resolved, over and done with, and later on comes the tribulation. These are all stimulating
Almost like a snowball,
a
right?
snowball,
That begins to grow and grow as it goes.
and everything is part of it. And that's why I said, well, when the 9/11 hit, why did that hit? Well, it hit because of what the White Horse did to Iraq. And they said, hey, we're going to come against you guys for doing this. So that was a direct result of what Iraq war was. And then the next thing, is famine is coming as a result of that supply issue and things that are happening. By the way, it didn't affect the oil and the wine yet. And now there's pestilence that looks like it could turn into a fairly sizable implication of death around the world, which is, we have yet to see that, which probably means, again, we have more time before the tribulation comes. But you can almost look at it and say, man, I could see how one after the other, occurred and is headed toward the tribulation, because they're not individual units that are here and get resolved. They build on each other. So
curiosity, if you don't mind me asking, Napa Valley, have they been affected by the fires? I know, like on a worldwide scale, wine seems to still be in abundance everywhere. Has Napa Valley been affected at all with all of the California fires?
There has been some vineyards that have been burned as a result of it, but not to an extent that has affected the wine, even the prices on the wine, which is surprising.
Right. That's the one thing that it seems like it's very, very easy to get.
Yeah, it's so easy to get. And Napa is still thriving, although they have individual ones. Partly is there's been such a explosive growth of vineyards.
Yes. Throughout the United States, there's several vineyards, within a half-hour drive from here. In New Hampshire,
throughout the United States and in Europe, that have continue to produce and thrive at the moment. So wine per se hasn't been affected, although little individual ones have
Right.
been. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, listen, we had a great time talking about the seals. We'll continue on.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Look at the next step, which is we're going to get into the rapture and a variety of next things that happen, which is a
Right.
big
And now
question
we
for
only
everybody.
talked about 4 of the 7 seals. So there's 3
Right.
others, and we'll get to that later down the road.
We have
correct?
we have 3 others to go to, and we'll talk a little bit about those, but we'll pick those up in the right sequence. So it's going to be fun to do.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right. Well,
So-
thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, Rich. We appreciate it.
Yep, and we'll
This
see
is-
you
this is
on
good
Monday.
stuff.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.